The stone floors of the Moonfall pack house were ice cold against Lila's knees as she scrubbed away the evidence of last night's feast. Her omega scent, weak, vanilla tinged with exhaustion, barely registered among the lingering aromas of roasted meat and spilled wine. Around her, the pack buzzed with electric anticipation, their voices carrying whispers of the ceremony that would change everything. The Alpha King arrives at sunset, Beta Marcus announced from the Great Hall's entrance, his voice cutting through the morning chatter like a blade. Every unmated female of age will present themselves for consideration. Lila's hands stilled on the rough bristles of her brush. The Alpha King Darius Blackthorne, ruler of all werewolves in the Northern Territories, was coming to choose a mate, his Luna, the woman who would stand beside the most powerful wolf alive and help him rule their kind. She pressed her forehead to the cool stone, allowing herself one moment of impossible fantasy. What would it feel like to be chosen, to matter, to have a voice that carried weight instead of whispers that went unheard? "Dream on, little Omega," sneered Cassie, stepping around Lila's scrubbing form without a second glance. Some of us were born for greatness. Others were born to clean up after it.
The massive oak doors of the pack house burst open with such force that ancient hinges groaned in protest. Vera Nightshade swept into the great hall like a dark queen, returning to reclaim her throne, her hybrid aura suffocating the air with supernatural power that made lesser wolves whimper and submit. Where Lyla was small and forgettable, Vera commanded attention. Raven black hair cascaded down her back in perfect waves, and her violet eyes, a gift from her vampire father, seemed to glow with inner fire. She moved with predatory grace, each step deliberate and hypnotic, her half-vampire nature evident in the way shadows seemed to bend toward her. "Sister," Vera's voice dripped with false affection as her gaze found Lyla still kneeling on the floor. "Still playing the perfect little servant, I see." Behind Vera followed her entourage, 3 vampire-werewolf hybrids like herself, their pale skin and enhanced beauty making the regular pack members look ordinary by comparison. They arranged themselves around Vera like a dark court, their loyalty absolute and their disdain for pure werewolves obvious. "The future Luna has arrived," Vera announced to the hall, her voice carrying supernatural compulsion that made heads turn and eyes widen with admiration. "I trust my chambers have been prepared to appropriate standards." Alpha Thomas, their adoptive father and pack leader, stepped forward with a strained smile. "Of course, Vera, though I should remind you that the Alpha King makes his own choice." "Does he?" Vera's laugh was like tinkling glass with razor edges. "We both know I'm the only suitable candidate here. Hybrid strength, vampire beauty, werewolf loyalty. I was born for this role."
Lyla rose to her feet, bucket in hand, and tried to navigate around the crowd that had gathered to gawk at Vera's dramatic entrance. Her adoptive sister had always been magnetic, drawing people into her orbit like moths to flame. Even as children, Vera had commanded attention while Lyla faded into the background. The great hall's side door led to the kitchens, where Lyla could dispose of her dirty water and perhaps find a corner to make herself invisible until the ceremony began. She kept her head down, moving with the practiced stealth of someone accustomed to being overlooked. But fate had other plans. As she rounded the corner at the exact moment a figure emerged from the opposite direction, solid muscle met her small frame with the force of a truck. The bucket flew from her hands, dirty water arcing through the air in a perfect crystal spray before gravity claimed it. Time stopped. Ice blue eyes met hers, eyes that held the power of winter storms and the depth of ancient glaciers. The scent that filled her nostrils was pure alpha dominance, cedar and lightning, snow-covered mountains, and wild freedom. It crashed over her senses like a tsunami, drowning her in recognition that went soul deep. Alpha King Darius Blackthorne stood before her, 6.5 feet of lethal grace and supernatural power, his black hair still bearing traces of snow from his journey. Water dripped from his expensive leather jacket, her dirty scrub water, but his gaze never left her face. Mate. His wolf whispered so quietly only she could hear it, the word carrying the weight of destiny. Lyla's bucket clattered to the floor between them, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the sudden silence.
You! The shriek that tore through the air could have shattered glass. Vera's supernatural senses had caught the scent change immediately. The way Lyla's weak vanilla suddenly bloomed with power. How the Alpha King's cedar and lightning scent twisted and merged with something that didn't belong to her. In the blink of an eye, Vera crossed the distance between them, her vampire speed making her seem to teleport. Her violet eyes had gone completely black with rage, fangs extending as her hybrid nature surged to the surface in response to what she was witnessing. "How dare you!" Vera snarled, her voice carrying supernatural compulsion that made several pack members drop to their knees. "You pathetic little Omega! You think you can steal what's mine?" Lyla stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The Alpha King stood like a statue, his entire body rigid with control, as his wolf fought against the chains of his human restraint. The air around him shimmered with barely contained power, and she could feel the force of his dominance pressing against her skin like a physical weight. "Vera, please," Lyla began, but her adoptive sister's fury had passed the point of reason. 20 years! Vera's voice cracked with hysteria. 20 years! I've prepared for this moment! I've been groomed since childhood to be the perfect Luna. I have vampire strength, werewolf loyalty, connections across 3 packs. And you? She gestured at Lyla with disgust. You're nothing. A weak little Omega who can't even shift properly. The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the supernatural tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Pack members whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between the sisters and their increasingly dangerous Alpha King.
The slap came without warning. Vera's hybrid strength turned what should have been a simple strike into something devastating. The sound of flesh meeting flesh cracked through the great hall like a whip, echoing off stone walls and high ceilings with brutal finality. Lyla's head snapped to the side with a violent force, stars exploding behind her eyes as pain radiated through her skull. The taste of copper flooded her mouth as her lips split against her teeth, blood welling up and spilling over in a crimson stream. She staggered, but didn't fall, though her legs trembled with the effort of staying upright. Her cheek burned like fire, already swelling from the supernatural force behind the blow. In the sudden, terrible silence that followed, she could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The entire pack had gone still as death. Even the hybrid entourage looked shocked at Vera's public display of violence against a pack member. In werewolf society, such attacks required justification or invitation challenge. Vera had just committed assault in front of witnesses. But Lyla barely noticed the crowd's reaction. All her attention focused on the tremor that had started in the air around them, a vibration so deep it seemed to originate from the earth itself. The Alpha King was shaking with rage.
When Darius Blackthorne's wolf finally surfaced, the temperature in the great hall plummeted by 20 degrees. His human facade cracked like thin ice, revealing the apex predator beneath. His eyes blazed with supernatural fire, no longer the cool blue of winter storms, but the burning gold of a wolf pushed beyond all limits. The scent of his fury filled the air like ozone before lightning, sharp and deadly and absolutely terrifying. Every wolf in the hall dropped to their bellies in submission, their bodies responding to an alpha dominance so overwhelming it bypassed conscious thought. Even Vera's hybrid companions found themselves fighting the urge to prostrate themselves before this living embodiment of werewolf power. "Mine!" The word tore from his throat in a voice that was barely human, carrying harmonics that made the stone walls vibrate. It wasn't a request or a declaration. It was a law of nature, as immutable as gravity or the rising of the moon. He moved toward Vera with predatory precision, each step deliberate and measured. His wolf had marked Lyla as mate, had felt her pain as his own, and now demanded blood payment for the injury to what belonged to him. Vera tried to stand her ground, her own hybrid nature bristling with challenge, but she was facing something beyond her power level. The Alpha King didn't just rule werewolves through politics or alliances. He was the apex of their species, bred from generations of the strongest and most dominant bloodlines. "You touched my mate," he said, and though his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, every person in the hall heard it clearly. "You harmed what is mine." The promise of retribution hung in the air like a death sentence.
Darius stalked forward with the lethal grace of a wolf closing in for the kill, each step calculated to maximize the psychological impact on his prey. The great hall had become his hunting ground, and every eye tracked his movement with the fascination of prey watching their predator approach. His alpha aura expanded outward in waves, pressing against every wolf present until they whimpered and pressed themselves even flatter against the cold stone floor. The supernatural pressure was suffocating, a reminder that they were in the presence of not just any alpha, but the alpha, the wolf who could command their submission with nothing more than a thought. Beta Marcus, a wolf who had faced down rogue packs and territorial disputes without flinching, found himself trembling as the Alpha King's power washed over him. "Your Majesty," he managed to choke out, his voice barely audible. "Please." "Silence." The word cut through the air like a blade, and Marcus's mouth snapped shut as if physically forced closed. Darius hadn't even looked at him. His entire focus remained locked on Vera, who was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of her mistake. The Alpha King's supernatural dominance had turned the Great Hall into a pressure cooker. Windows rattled in their frames, and the massive chandelier overhead swayed despite the absence of any wind. This was what it meant to face the fury of the most powerful werewolf alive. Raw, primal power that could crush opposition through presence alone. Vera's vampire-werewolf hybrid strength, which had seemed so impressive moments before, now felt like a child's toy compared to the nuclear reactor of dominance bearing down on her.
Through the haze of pain and shock, Lyla forced herself to straighten. Blood continued to trickle from her split lip, and her cheek throbbed with each heartbeat. But something deeper than physical hurt drove her to action. The Alpha King's rage was a living thing, feeding on itself and growing stronger with each passing second. Soon it would consume everything in its path, including her. "Stop!" Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, lost in the supernatural tension crackling through the air. She tried again, putting more strength behind the word. "Stop!" This time, incredibly, the Alpha King heard her. His burning gold gaze snapped to her face, and for a moment the terrible pressure in the air wavered. She could see him fighting for control, his human mind wrestling with the wolf's demand for blood payment. Lyla took a shaky step forward, then another, until she stood directly between Darius and Vera. Her small frame was laughably inadequate as a barrier between two supernatural forces, but she planted her feet and lifted her chin with defiant courage that surprised everyone present, including herself. "She's my sister," Lyla said, meeting those blazing eyes without flinching. "Family, and I won't watch you destroy her for something she did to me." The boldness of it, a weak Omega standing up to the Alpha King himself, sent ripples of shock through the assembled pack. Several wolves gasped audibly, unable to believe what they were witnessing. But instead of escalating his fury, something in Lyla's brave defiance seemed to reach the man beneath the monster. Darius blinked, and when his eyes opened again, some of the burning gold had faded back toward human blue.
Justification. Vera's voice cracked like a whip as she finally found her tongue, desperation lending strength to her words. I demand justification for this farce. She gestured wildly between Lyla and the Alpha King, her hybrid nature still bristling with challenge despite the overwhelming power she faced. Years of preparation, of believing herself destined for greatness, weren't going to be dismissed without a fight. I am Vera Nightshade, daughter of the Vampire Lord of the Eastern Territories and Alpha Thomas of the Moonfall Pack, she declared, her voice carrying supernatural compulsion that made several pack members nod unconsciously. I have trained since childhood to be Luna. I have the strength, the connections, the bloodline. What does she have? She pointed at Lyla with contempt that made her lip curl. She's weak. Omega rank. She can barely shift, can't fight, has no useful alliances. She's nobody. Vera's vampire allies stepped forward in support, their pale faces set with determination. The hybrid speaks truth, one of them said, his accent carrying the ancient formality of old vampire courts. By blood and training, she has the superior claim. Alpha Thomas looked torn between supporting his adopted daughter and avoiding the wrath of the Alpha King. Other pack members shifted restlessly, uncertain where to place their loyalty in this unprecedented situation. The great hall buzzed with whispered conversations as alliances were measured and political calculations made. Vera had support, not just from her vampire connections, but from pack members who had expected her rise to power and built their own clans around it.
Darius finally moved, but not toward Vera. Instead, he approached Lyla with movements so gentle they seemed impossible from someone who had been radiating lethal menace moments before. His earlier fury transformed into something else entirely, a focused intensity that was somehow even more powerful for being controlled. "Let me see," he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion as he reached toward her injured face. Lyla froze as his fingers, large, warm, and surprisingly gentle, brushed against her swollen cheek. The moment his skin made contact with hers, electricity shot through her entire body. Not painful, but overwhelming, like touching a live wire of purest sensation. The mate bond, dormant until now, flared to life between them. It wasn't the gentle warmth described in romantic stories. This was a wildfire, consuming and transformative, rewriting her very DNA with supernatural force. Every cell in her body recognized him, claimed him, needed him with an intensity that stole her breath. Her weak vanilla scent exploded into something rich and complex, vanilla and moonlight, strength wrapped in silk. The change was so dramatic that wolves throughout a hall lifted their heads, nostrils flaring as they tried to process the impossible transformation happening before their eyes. Darius inhaled deeply, his own scent shifting and intertwining with hers until they became something new together. His wolf had found its mate, and nothing else in the world mattered. "Mine," he whispered, the word carrying absolute conviction. Not a claim of ownership, but a recognition of truth as fundamental as the law of gravity.
I choose her. 3 simple words that reordered the entire universe. Darius's declaration rang through the great hall with the weight of divine pronouncement. Every wolf present felt the power behind those words. Not just the Alpha King's will, but something deeper. the acknowledgement of a bond that transcended politics, alliances, and carefully laid plans. Vera's face went white with shock, then flushed deep red with humiliation and rage. "You can't," she snarled, her vampire fangs extending fully as her hybrid nature surged in response to being rejected. "I'm the superior choice by every measure." "Are you?" Darius's voice carried a dangerous edge as he turned to face her, while keeping one protective hand on Lyla's shoulder. "Because my wolf recognizes only one truth. She is my mate. Not by convenience or politics or bloodline calculations, but by the will of the moon goddess herself." The religious reference sent another ripple through the crowd. In werewolf society, to claim divine selection was either the highest truth or the most dangerous blasphemy. Alpha Thomas stepped forward, his face pale with the political implications crashing down around them. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No." The Alpha King's refusal was absolute. "This concerns the entire pack, so they will witness the truth of it." He turned back to Lyla, his ice-blue eyes boring into hers with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. "I offer you the choice freely, Lyla Nightshade. Will you accept the mate bond? Will you stand beside me as my Luna and help me rule our people?" The formal proposal, spoken in front of witnesses, carried the weight of a sacred ritual. This was how Alpha Kings chose their mates, not through force or assumption, but by offered choice and willing acceptance.
Time crystallized around that moment of decision. Lyla could feel the eyes of every wolf in the hall upon her, waiting for her answer. The smart choice would be to refuse, to avoid the politics, the danger, the crushing responsibility of becoming Luna to the most powerful werewolf alive. But as she looked into Darius's eyes, she saw something that made her heart race. Not just desire or political necessity, but genuine care. He had defended her, protected her, chosen her despite every logical argument against it. "Yes," she whispered, the word carrying more courage than she'd ever shown in her life. "I accept." What happened next was beyond anything she could have prepared for. Darius's eyes blazed gold as his wolf surged forward, drawn by her acceptance like a moth to flame. His head lowered toward her neck with predatory purpose, and she felt the sharp press of elongated canines against the sensitive skin where her neck met her shoulder. The marking bite was both claim and transformation, a ritual older than recorded history that would change her on a cellular level. When an alpha marked his mate, he shared his power with her, elevated her to stand beside him as an equal. Pain and pleasure crashed through her as his teeth pierced her skin, but it lasted only seconds before supernatural fire raced through her bloodstream. The weak Omega who had scrubbed floors that morning began to die, replaced by something infinitely stronger. The scent that rolled off her now was pure Luna, power and moonlight, strength wrapped in silk, the commanding presence of a female alpha. Her spine straightened, her shoulders squared, and when she opened her eyes, they glowed with silver fire that made every wolf in the hall drop even lower in submission. Vera's scream of rage and denial echoed off the stone walls, but it was too late. The Alpha King had chosen, the bond was sealed, and the werewolf world would never be the same.
Consciousness returned to Lyla in waves, each surge bringing new awareness of changes that went bone deep. She lay in a bed that could have housed a small family, wrapped in silk sheets that whispered against skin that felt hypersensitive to every texture. The room around her was palatial, stone walls hung with ancient tapestries, a fireplace large enough to walk into, and windows that offered a commanding view of the territory she now shared dominion over. But it was her body that demanded attention. Power flowed through her veins like molten gold, settling into muscles that felt denser, stronger than they had ever been. Her senses had exploded into hyper-clarification. She could hear conversations happening 3 floors below, smell the individual scents of dozens of pack members, feel the subtle vibrations of wolves moving through the building. The mark on her neck thrummed with energy, a constant reminder of the bond that connected her to the most powerful wolf alive. Through it, she could sense Darius even though he wasn't physically present. His strength, his protective instincts, the way his attention focused on her even from a distance. A soft knock interrupted her exploration of these new abilities. "My lady, I've brought breakfast and fresh clothes." The voice belonged to Maria, an older Omega who had always been kind to her. "Come in," Lyla called, then froze at the sound of her own voice. It carried authority now, a resonance that made the words feel like commands rather than simple responses. Maria entered carrying a tray of food that smelled incredible to Lila's enhanced senses, but it was the Omega's reaction that truly drove home how much had changed. Maria approached with her head bowed in respect, her entire demeanor screaming submission to a superior wolf. She was treating Lyla like a Luna.
While Lyla struggled to understand her transformation, 3 floors below, Vera paced her chambers like a caged predator, her hybrid nature making the space feel claustrophobic and dangerous. Her vampire allies sat in careful silence, recognizing the signs of their leader's mounting fury. "Unacceptable," Vera snarled, her voice carrying harmonic undertones that made glasses ring and mirrors crack. 20 years of preparation destroyed by some cosmic joke. 20 years! She whirled toward her companions, violet eyes blazing with supernatural fire. "Adrian, what word from your sire? Surely the vampire lords won't stand for this insult to hybrid werewolf relations." Adrian, pale and elegant with the otherworldly beauty of the undead, chose his words carefully. "Lord Nightshade is displeased. He had hoped for a stronger alliance with the werewolf territories, but he will not move openly against the Alpha King without provocation." "Provocation?" Vera's laugh held no humor. "What greater provocation is there than spitting in the face of superior breeding?" Celine, her second vampire ally, shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should accept nothing." Vera's supernatural compulsion slammed into her followers, making them flinch backward. "I will not be humiliated by that pathetic Omega. If the Alpha King wants to make a mockery of Luna selection, then he'll learn the cost of such decisions." Her mind raced through possibilities, each more dangerous than the last. Pack members who had expected to benefit from her rise to power would be reconsidering their loyalties. But betrayed expectations could be turned into weapons, if properly cultivated.
Darius found Lyla in the castle's highest tower, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of his territory. She stood differently now, spine straight, shoulders back, unconsciously projecting the confidence that came with Luna power flowing through her veins. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, coming to stand beside her. His presence sent warm shivers down her spine through their newly forged bond. "Overwhelming," she admitted, gesturing toward the vast expanse of forest, mountains, and settlements that stretched beyond the horizon. "All those wolves? They're going to look to me for guidance, protection, leadership. Yesterday, I was scrubbing floors. Today, I'm supposed to help rule them all." Darius turned to study her profile, noting the way moonlight from the window caught in her hair and made her skin seem to glow with inner light. "Do you regret accepting the bond?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with significance. It would be easy to say yes, to acknowledge that she felt unprepared and overwhelmed. But as Lyla searched her feelings, she found something unexpected. "No," she said, surprise coloring her voice. "I don't regret it. I'm terrified, confused, completely out of my depth, but I don't regret it." She turned to meet his gaze, silver light dancing in her eyes. "Your wolf recognized something in me that I didn't even know existed. Maybe it's time I trusted that instinct." Darius smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness she'd seen from him. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes in mate selection, Lyla. She saw the Luna in you long before either of us did.
The sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn toward the tower's entrance. Beta Marcus climbed the spiral stairs with obvious reluctance, his expression grim as he reached the top. "Your Majesty, my lady," he said, offering respectful bows to both of them. "The Council of Elders has requested an immediate audience." Lyla felt Darius tense beside her, his protective instincts flaring through their bond. "Let me guess, they have concerns about my choice of mate?" Marcus nodded uncomfortably. "They invoke the ancient laws, Your Majesty. The right to test the worthiness of any potential Luna, regardless of how she was chosen." "What kind of tests?" Lyla asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. "Combat trials, leadership challenges, demonstrations of supernatural ability," Marcus replied, his sympathy evident. "The Elders claim its tradition dating back centuries." Darius's growl rumbled through the tower like distant thunder. "Tradition conveniently invoked when they disapprove of my choice?" But Lyla surprised them both by straightening her shoulders and lifting her chin with determination. "Then we'll face the Elders," she said, her voice carrying newfound authority. "If they need proof that I can stand as Luna, I'll give it to them." The Beta's eyes widened at her transformation from uncertain Omega to resolute leader. Even Darius looked impressed by her quick adaptation to the challenge. "The trials begin tomorrow at sunset," Marcus informed them. "The entire pack will witness." As he departed, leaving them alone in the tower, Darius wrapped his arms around Lyla from behind, lending her his strength. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," he murmured against her ear. "Yes, I do," she replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Not just to them, but to myself. I need to know that I deserve this bond, this position, this responsibility. And if I fail the trials—" "You won't fail," Darius said with absolute conviction. "My wolf chose you for reasons that go beyond politics or power. Trust in that choice."
As night fell over the pack house, shadows crept through corridors where whispered conversations carried the weight of brewing rebellion. In a storage room deep below the main levels, a handful of wolves gathered around Vera like conspirators planning revolution. "She's weak," muttered Connor, a warrior who had expected promotion under Vera's anticipated rule. "Luna power or not, she's still just an Omega at heart. When the trials begin, she'll crack under pressure." "And if she doesn't?" asked Rebecca, one of the pack's senior females who had long resented taking orders from anyone she considered inferior. Vera's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Then we ensure she faces more pressure than she can handle. The trials have rules, but accidents happen. Warriors get carried away in combat demonstrations. Challenges escalate beyond safe limits." Her vampire allies exchanged glances, recognizing the dangerous territory their leader was entering. "Vera," Adrian said carefully, "if something happens to the Alpha King's mate during sanctioned trials, his retribution will be irrelevant if we're smart about it. An unfortunate training accident that reveals her unsuitability for Luna's status. The Alpha King will have no choice but to select a more appropriate mate." She looked around the circle of conspirators, her supernatural compulsion ensuring their cooperation, even if their consciences wavered. "Tomorrow night, we reclaim what should have been mine from the beginning."
Meanwhile, in the lunar quarters she now called home, Lyla stood before an ornate mirror that reflected back a woman she barely recognized. The weak Omega was gone, replaced by someone whose very presence commanded attention. Her hair seemed richer, her skin more luminous, and her eyes held depths of silver light that spoke of power beyond normal werewolf abilities. But it was the mark on her neck that drew her attention. 2 perfect puncture wounds surrounded by intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move in the firelight. The mating mark of an Alpha King was unlike anything in werewolf lore, carrying not just his claim, but his power, his authority, his very essence. Second thoughts? Darius asked, entering the room with the silent grace that marked all apex predators. Constantly, she admitted, then smiled to soften the honesty. But fear doesn't mean I'm making the wrong choice. It just means I understand the stakes. He approached slowly, giving her space to adjust to his presence as her senses were still adapting to their supernatural sensitivity. The trials tomorrow won't be easy. The elders will push you to your limits and beyond, looking for any sign of weakness. Then I won't show them any, Lyla replied, meeting his eyes in the mirror. I may have been weak before, but I am not that person anymore. Your mark changed me, awakened something that was always there, but buried beneath years of believing I was nothing special. Darius wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him, drawing strength from their connection. Through their bond, she could feel his absolute faith in her abilities, his pride in her transformation, and his determination to protect her no matter what challenges lay ahead. Whatever comes tomorrow, we face it together. Outside their window, the full moon hung in the sky like a silver eye, blessing the newest Luna with light that would soon be tested by fire.
Dawn brought with it the sound of steel against steel as Lyla found herself in the pack's training grounds, facing her first real test of the supernatural abilities flowing through her transformed body. Her opponent was Marcus himself, the beta moving with calculated precision as he tested her reflexes and instincts. The sword in her hand felt like a natural extension of her arm, despite never having held such a weapon before. Luna power didn't just grant physical enhancement. It unlocked genetic memories, instinctive knowledge passed down through generations of female alphas who had ruled alongside their mates. Again, Marcus called, launching into another attack sequence. His movements were swift enough to blur, but Lyla's enhanced senses tracked every shift in his stance, every tell that preceded his strikes. She parried his thrust with fluid grace, spun away from his follow-up, and somehow found herself behind him with her blade pressed to his throat, in a move that surprised them both. The watching wolves murmured appreciatively. Even in her first training session, she was demonstrating skill that took others years to develop. Incredible, Marcus breathed, stepping away and lowering his weapon. Your Majesty was right. The Luna power has awakened combat instincts I've never seen in someone so new to training. But even as pride swelled in her chest, Lyla couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Her peripheral vision caught glimpses of Vera and her allies observing from the shadows, their expressions calculating and cold. Whatever they were planning, it went beyond simple resentment.
The sensation of being stalked followed Lyla throughout the day, making her newly enhanced senses tingle with warning. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. Every whispered conversation carried undertones of conspiracy. The Luna power flooding her system came with protective instincts that screamed danger, but she couldn't identify the source. It wasn't until she was walking through the packhouse's lower levels, seeking a moment of solitude to prepare mentally for the evening's trials, that the attack came. Vera materialized from the darkness with vampire speed, her hybrid nature allowing her to move faster than even Lyla's enhanced reflexes could track. Supernatural strength drove her fist toward Lyla's face with enough force to shatter bone. But at the last instant, something extraordinary happened. Luna power exploded through Lyla's body like liquid lightning. Her hand snapped up to catch Vera's wrist, stopping the strike mid-flight with strength that surprised them both. Silver light blazed from her eyes as her wolf surged forward, no longer the weak creature that had cowered for years, but something magnificent and terrible. "Impossible!" Vera snarled, her violet eyes wide with shock. "You're still just an Omega wearing borrowed power." "Am I?" Lyla's voice carried harmonics that made the stone walls vibrate. The mark on her neck blazed with silver fire as she drew on the bond connecting her to Darius, channeling not just his strength, but the authority of every Alpha King who had come before him. She released Vera's wrist and stepped back, but there was nothing submissive about the movement. It was the measured retreat of a predator choosing her ground.
The commotion in the lower levels sent vibrations through the packhouse that reached Darius in his study, 3 floors above. The bond between them carried Lyla's sudden surge of adrenaline, her flash of mortal terror, followed by blazing determination. His wolf clawed at his consciousness, demanding he race to protect his mate. But by the time he reached the corridor where the confrontation was taking place, he found something that made him stop in his tracks with pride and amazement. Lyla stood in the center of the hallway like an avenging angel, silver light radiating from her skin in waves that made her appear almost ethereal. Vera crouched several feet away, her hybrid nature fully manifested. Fangs extended, claws out, violet eyes blazing with supernatural fire, but clearly on the defensive. "You want to test my worthiness to be Luna?" Lyla asked, her voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "Then face me properly, not in shadows and ambush, but in open challenge where all can witness the outcome." Vera hissed like an angry cat, her pride warring with the growing realization that she might have underestimated her opponent. "You think your borrowed power makes you my equal? I am vampire and werewolf combined, trained since childhood in both traditions." "And I am Luna," she replied with simple conviction. "Chosen by the moon goddess, marked by the Alpha King, and awakened to power you cannot comprehend. If you want what is mine, come and take it." The challenge hung in the air between them like a blade, its weight felt by every wolf within hearing distance. Darius remained motionless in the shadows, every instinct screaming at him to intervene. But his mate had issued formal challenge. To interfere now would undermine her authority and suggest she couldn't handle threats to her own position. Through their bond, he felt her confidence blazing like a star and realized with startling clarity that she didn't need his protection. The Luna power had awakened something in her that was magnificent and terrible in equal measure.
Word of the confrontation spread through the pack house like wildfire, drawing wolves from every corner of the building to witness what was rapidly becoming the most significant challenge in generations. The great hall filled with pack members, their voices a low rumble of excitement and apprehension as they debated the unprecedented situation. Ancient pack law was clear. When a potential Luna's worthiness was questioned through formal challenge, the matter could only be settled through combat, not to the death. Even Vera wouldn't dare go that far against the Alpha King's chosen mate, but to submission or incapacitation. Elder Matthias, the pack's most senior member, stepped forward to officiate the challenge. His weathered face was grave as he looked between the 2 women who would soon attempt to tear each other apart. "This is formal challenge for the right to stand as Luna beside our Alpha King," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "The rules are ancient and binding. No weapons, no outside interference. Combat continues until one yields or cannot continue." Lyla stepped into the center of the circle that had formed, her movements fluid and confident. The silver light had faded from her skin, but power still radiated from her in waves that made lesser wolves back away instinctively. Vera entered from the opposite side, her hybrid nature making her appear larger and more dangerous than her human form suggested. Her vampire allies had positioned themselves strategically around the circle, ready to provide support if needed. "Begin," Elder Matthias declared.
The first exchange happened at supernatural speed. Vera launched herself forward with vampire quickness, claws extended and fangs bared, aiming to end the fight before Lyla could fully adapt to her new abilities. But Luna power came with more than enhanced strength. It brought precognition, the ability to sense an opponent's intentions before they acted. Lyla sidestepped the attack with impossible grace, her movements so fluid it seemed choreographed. Vera's momentum carried her past her target, and she spun with feline quickness to face her opponent again. This time her approach was more cautious, circling Lyla like the predator she was. "You cannot run forever, little Omega," Vera taunted, hoping to provoke a reckless attack. "Your borrowed power will fade, but my hybrid strength is eternal." Lyla's response was to smile, an expression so serene and confident that it sent chills through the watching crowd. "I'm not running," she said calmly. "I'm learning." And it was true. With each passing second, the Luna power integrated more fully with her consciousness. Combat instincts that had belonged to generations of female alphas flowed through her mind, teaching her strategies and techniques that Vera had never encountered. When Vera struck again, Lyla was ready. She caught the hybrid's wrist in an iron grip, used her opponent's momentum against her, and sent Vera tumbling across the stone floor with a throw that demonstrated both skill and devastating strength.
The fight that followed was unlike anything the pack had ever witnessed. Vera fought with the desperate fury of someone whose entire identity was being challenged, her hybrid abilities pushed to their absolute limits. She moved with vampire speed, struck with werewolf strength, and used every dirty trick learned in decades of training. But Lyla fought with something more dangerous than skill or strength. She fought with absolute certainty in her right to be exactly where she was. Luna power flowed through her like molten gold, granting not just physical enhancement, but perfect combat instincts that seemed to anticipate Vera's every move. The tide of battle shifted moment by moment. Vera would gain advantage through experience and ruthless tactics, only to find herself countered by techniques that Lyla shouldn't have known. The Luna power wasn't just making her stronger, it was making her smarter, more intuitive, more complete as a warrior. When the end came, it was almost anticlimactic. Vera, exhausted from throwing everything she had at an opponent who seemed to grow stronger with each exchange, overextended herself in a final desperate gambit. Lyla stepped inside the attack, wrapped her arms around Vera's torso, and drove her to the ground with authority that brooked no resistance. "Yield," Lyla commanded, her voice carrying supernatural compulsion that made every wolf in the hall feel the urge to submit. Vera struggled briefly, then went limp beneath her sister's grip. "I yield," she gasped, the words torn from her throat by power she could no longer resist. The great hall erupted in roars of approval as the pack witnessed their new Luna's first victory. But for Lyla, kneeling over her defeated sister, the moment felt less like triumph and more like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of something far more challenging. She had proven her strength. Now came the harder task of proving her wisdom.
3 days after her victory over Vera, Lyla stood before the assembled Council of Elders in the pack's most sacred space, a circular chamber carved from living rock deep beneath the pack house, where decisions affecting the fate of all northern werewolves were made. The formal trials to test her worthiness as Luna had been designed centuries ago to push potential mates beyond their breaking points. Combat prowess was only the first requirement. Leadership, wisdom, mercy, strength, all would be examined under conditions that had broken lesser wolves. "The trial of wisdom begins now," Elder Matthias announced, his voice echoing off ancient stone walls. "You will be presented with scenarios that have faced Luna Queens throughout our history. Your responses will determine your fitness to guide our people." They began with economic disputes between packs, territorial boundary disagreements, conflicts over resources that could escalate into war if mishandled. Each scenario was more complex than the last, designed to test not just her knowledge, but her instincts for leadership. Lyla found herself drawing on memories that weren't entirely her own. The Luna power carried with it the accumulated wisdom of every female alpha who had ruled before her. But more than that, her years of invisibility as an Omega had taught her to observe, to understand the motivations that drove wolves at every level of the pack hierarchy. Her responses were innovative, compassionate, and practical in ways that impressed even the most skeptical elders. Where previous candidates had relied on tradition or force, she found paths that addressed root causes and built lasting peace.
The trial of mercy brought Vera before her in chains. Lyla's sister knelt in the center of the sacred circle, her hybrid pride broken by 3 days of imprisonment following her challenged defeat. The elders had discovered evidence of her conspiracy, pack members willing to testify about her plans to cause training accidents during the Luna trials. "The crime is clear," Elder Matthias intoned. "Conspiracy to harm the Alpha King's chosen mate, incitement to rebellion, violation of sacred challenge protocols. The traditional punishment is exile or death." All eyes turned to Lyla, waiting to see how she would handle the first true test of her capacity for leadership. Vera had humiliated her, attacked her, tried to destroy her life. Justice demanded severe punishment. But as Lyla looked down at her sister, she saw not just the hybrid who had tormented her for years, but a woman destroyed by expectations she could never fulfill. "Vera," Lyla said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute command, but also unexpected gentleness. "Do you understand why you failed?" Her sister's violet eyes blazed with residual defiance. "Because the universe has a twisted sense of humor? Because you never learned that true strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. You have power, intelligence, ability, but you've spent years using those gifts to make others feel small. A Luna's role is to nurture, protect, and guide. How can you lead wolves you despise?" The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Vera's defiant mask cracked, revealing the pain and insecurity beneath.
"I offer you a choice," Lyla continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the sacred chamber. "Accept exile and live with the consequences of your actions, or remain here and learn what it truly means to serve your people instead of ruling them." Gasps echoed through the chamber. The elders exchanged shocked glances. This was unprecedented mercy for such serious crimes. "You would trust her to remain after what she attempted?" Elder Sarah asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "I would trust her to choose who she wants to become. Vera is my sister. She's made terrible choices, but she's not irredeemable. Everyone deserves the chance to be better than their worst moment." Vera stared up at her with an expression that cycled through confusion, anger, and something that might have been gratitude. "Why?" she whispered. "Because that's what a Luna does," Lyla said simply. "We protect our people, even when they've lost the ability to protect themselves." The watching elders murmured among themselves, clearly impressed by this demonstration of both strength and compassion. A Luna who could show mercy to her greatest enemy would be infinitely more capable of guiding a diverse pack through the challenges ahead. Vera bowed her head, the fight finally going out of her completely. "I choose to stay, and to learn, if you'll teach me."
The final trial came at sunset, conducted in the pack's outdoor amphitheater under the light of the rising full moon. Every wolf in the territory had gathered to witness this culmination of the Luna trials, a demonstration of supernatural power that would either confirm Lyla's fitness to rule or reveal her inadequacy before all.
"The trial of power," Elder Matthias announced, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "Let the candidate demonstrate her connection to the moon goddess and her ability to channel Luna strength for the protection of her people." Previous candidates had been expected to shift into their wolf forms and display enhanced speed, strength, or supernatural abilities. But as Lyla stood in the center of the amphitheater, she felt something far more significant building within her. The mark on her neck began to glow with silver fire, and power flowed through her like a river of molten moonlight. But this wasn't just the enhanced abilities she'd discovered since her nating. This was something deeper, more fundamental to her very nature. She lifted her hands toward the full moon overhead, and light answered her call. Streams of silver radiance poured from the lunar surface, connecting with her raised palms and flowing through her body in visible currents of power. The light spread outward from where she stood, washing over the assembled wolves in waves that made them gasp with wonder and awe. But more than spectacle, the light carried healing. Pack members with old injuries felt their pain ease. Wolves suffering from illness felt strength returning to their bodies. The very air seemed cleaner, more vibrant, charged with life-giving energy.
Impossible, breathed Elder Sarah, her eyes wide with amazement. This is power beyond any Luna in recorded history. The light show continued for several more minutes before gradually fading, leaving Lyla standing in the center of the amphitheater with silver fire still dancing in her eyes. The assembled wolves stared at her in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. "I don't understand it myself," Lyla admitted, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "But I can feel the moon goddess's blessing flowing through me, connecting me to every wolf under her light. This power, it's not mine alone. It belongs to all of us, channeled through me for our collective protection and growth." Elder Matthias stepped forward, his weathered face transformed by wonder. "In 60 years of serving this pack, I have never witnessed such a display of divine favor. The moon goddess has not merely accepted your mating to the Alpha King, she has blessed it with power beyond our understanding." One by one, the watching wolves began to howl, not in challenge or defiance, but in recognition and celebration. The sound built into a crescendo that echoed across the territory, announcing to every creature within miles that the northern werewolves had found their Luna Queen. Darius appeared at Lyla's side as if materialized from moonbeams themselves, his presence solid and grounding after the supernatural experience she'd just undergone. Through their bond, she felt his pride, his awe, and his absolute love for the magnificent woman she had become.
The formal ceremony that followed was ancient ritual, made new by the unprecedented circumstances of Lyla's rise to power. Elder after elder approached to offer their recognition, their loyalty, their promise to support her reign as Luna Queen. But it was the moment when Vera approached, moving slowly through the crowd with her head bowed in genuine respect, that truly marked Lyla's transformation from Omega to leader. "My queen," Vera said, the title carrying none of the mockery that might have been expected. "I pledge my loyalty, my service, and my commitment to becoming worthy of the mercy you've shown me." She knelt before her sister, and the symbolism was lost on no one. The hybrid who had spent years believing herself superior to every werewolf around her now acknowledged Lyla's authority willingly and completely. "Rise, sister," Lyla said, helping Vera to her feet. "We have work to do." As the celebration continued around them, Darius drew his mate aside for a private moment beneath the stars. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing their conversation from days earlier. Lyla looked out over the territory that was now hers to protect, at the wolves who looked to her for guidance, at the future that stretched ahead filled with challenges and possibilities in equal measure. "None," she said, and meant it completely. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be."
The Omega who had scrubbed floors and accepted invisibility was gone forever, replaced by a Luna Queen whose power came not from the mark on her neck or the bond with her mate, but from the strength of her own heart and the blessing of the Moon Goddess herself.
6 months after her ascension to Luna Queen, Lyla stood in the Great Hall where her journey had begun, but everything had changed. The space buzzed with purposeful activity as pack members worked together on projects that would have been impossible under the old hierarchy. Where once there had been rigid separations between ranks, now wolves collaborated based on skill and interest rather than birthright. Omegas who had shown aptitude for leadership were being trained for higher positions. Warriors who preferred intellectual pursuits found themselves in advisory roles. The entire social structure was evolving under Lyla's guidance. The northern border packs have agreed to the new resource-sharing treaty, Marcus reported, spreading maps across the oak table that now served as her informal office. They're particularly interested in the healing techniques you've been developing. Lyla nodded, studying the territorial boundaries that had been sources of conflict for generations. Her unique connection to lunar power had revealed new possibilities for pack cooperation, shared strength instead of competition, collective growth instead of individual dominance. "And Vera's diplomatic mission to the Eastern Territories?" she asked. "Proceeding better than expected," Marcus replied with evident surprise. Apparently, her hybrid nature gives her credibility with vampire-werewolf relations that pure-blooded wolves lack. Who would have thought? Lyla smiled, remembering her sister's initial resistance to being assigned diplomatic duties. But Vera had discovered a talent for negotiation that utilized her unique heritage in positive ways, for the first time in her life.
Not everyone had adapted smoothly to the new order. In the pack's detention area, Connor and 2 other conspirators from Vera's failed rebellion sat in cells designed to hold supernatural criminals. They had refused every offer of redemption, clinging to old prejudices about Omega worthiness and traditional pack hierarchy. They've requested formal exile rather than rehabilitation, Darius reported, joining Lyla in the detention area's common room. Some wolves are too set in their ways to change. Lyla studied the 3 prisoners through the reinforced glass of their holding area. Connor glared back at her with undimmed hatred, his belief in Omega inferiority stronger than his regard for his own future. Grant their request, she decided after a moment, but make sure they understand the terms. They can never return to pack territory, can never contact current members, and if they cause trouble for other packs, they'll face consequences from us. Merciful to the end, Darius observed, though his tone carried approval rather than criticism. Everyone gets the chance to choose who they want to be. If they choose exile over growth, that's their decision to live with. As the former conspirators were processed for banishment, she felt a pang of sadness, but no regret. Some wolves couldn't be saved from their own limitations, but that didn't mean she should stop trying to help those who wanted to change.
The ceremony to formally establish the new pack structure took place under another full moon, with representatives from allied territories gathering to witness the transformation of werewolf society that was spreading outward from their territory. "Today, we establish new traditions," Lyla announced to the assembled crowd, her voice carrying the authority that had become second nature over the months of her reign. "Rank by birth is replaced by rank through merit. Leadership through fear is replaced by leadership through service. Competition between packs is replaced by cooperation for the greater good." The formal documents she and Darius had drafted represented months of careful work, creating governmental structures that maintained the strength of werewolf hierarchy while allowing for social mobility that had never existed before. Elder Matthias, now serving as their chief advisor rather than pack judge, stepped forward to speak for the council. "These changes represent the most significant evolution in werewolf society in 5 centuries. Future generations will mark this day as the beginning of a new age." Representatives from neighboring packs nodded their agreement, many already implementing similar reforms in their own territories. What had started as one Luna's vision was becoming a movement that would reshape their entire species. "Let it be recorded," Darius declared, "that these laws take effect immediately across all territories under our protection."
The coronation that followed was pageantry on a scale that matched the significance of the moment. Lyla wore a crown forged from silver and moonstone that seemed to capture and reflect lunar light, while Darius's own crown had been reforged to match hers, symbols of power shared rather than power held over others. But it was the moment when they knelt together before Elder Matthias to receive the moon goddess's blessing that truly marked their transformation from mates to monarchs. "Do you swear to protect all wolves under your care, regardless of rank, origin, or past mistakes?" the elder intoned, following ceremony older than recorded history. "We swear," they replied in unison, their voices carrying the weight of absolute commitment. "Do you swear to rule with wisdom, mercy, and strength in equal measure?" "We swear." "Do you swear to face whatever challenges await your reign as partners, never allowing power to divide what the moon goddess has united?" "We swear." As the blessing concluded, silver light descended from the full moon overhead, enveloping both rulers in a radiance that made them appear almost divine to the watching crowd. When the light faded, they rose as the acknowledged Alpha King and Luna Queen of the Northern Territories, their authority blessed by the goddess herself.
The celebration continued deep into the night, but eventually Lyla found herself seeking solitude in the castle's highest tower, the same place where she and Darius had first discussed her transformation from Omega to Luna. She wasn't alone before familiar footsteps announced Vera's arrival. Her sister moved with confidence now, but it was earned confidence rather than the brittle arrogance she'd displayed for years. "Regrets?" Vera asked, unconsciously echoing the question Darius had asked so many months ago. "None," Lyla replied, then smiled. "Well, maybe one. I regret that it took us so long to become real sisters instead of rivals." Vera joined her at the window, both women looking out over territory that had been transformed by leadership based on cooperation rather than dominance. "I was so angry for so long," Vera admitted. "Angry that you got what I thought I deserved. Angry that the universe seemed to favor you over me. It took months of diplomatic work to realize that I was never meant to be Luna." "What were you meant to be?" Lyla asked. "A bridge," Vera replied with growing certainty. "Between our people and the vampire territories, between old ways and new possibilities. My hybrid nature isn't a mark of superiority. It's a tool for building connections that purebloods can't create." Lyla reached over and took her sister's hand, squeezing gently. "I'm proud of who you've become, Vera, and grateful for the second chance you took."
As dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Darius found his mate and her sister sharing comfortable silence in their tower sanctuary. The sight of them together, no longer enemies but true family, filled him with satisfaction deeper than any political victory. "The future awaits," he said, wrapping his arms around Lyla from behind and drawing her back against his chest. "Yes," she agreed, feeling through their bond his excitement for the challenges ahead. "Diplomatic missions to establish relations with packs we've never contacted before. Infrastructure projects that will improve life for every wolf in our territory. Educational programs to help Omegas develop their potential instead of accepting limitations. Don't forget the most important project," Vera added with a grin, "that would have been malicious once but now carried only affection." "Which is?" Lyla asked. "Producing heirs to continue this revolutionary approach to leadership. The Northern Territories need little princes and princesses raised with your values rather than the old prejudices." Lyla blushed, but didn't protest the suggestion. Through their bond, She felt Darius's hope for cubs that would grow up in a world where worth was determined by character rather than birth rank. "One challenge at a time," she said, but her smile suggested it was a challenge she looked forward to facing. As the sun rose over their territory, the Alpha King and Luna Queen stood together in their tower, surrounded by family and looking toward a future bright with possibility. The Omega, who had once scrubbed floors while dreaming of significance, had become a leader whose influence would echo through generations. And in the growing light of dawn, Lyla understood with absolute certainty that every moment of her journey, every hardship, every triumph, every choice that had led her to this tower had been worth it. She was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the wolves who belonged beside her, facing exactly the future she was meant to create. The moon goddess, after all, never made mistakes.
If you enjoyed this transformation from Omega to Luna Queen, like and subscribe for more supernatural romance stories that celebrate the power of finding your true strength. Comment below which moment in Lyla's journey resonated most with you. Was it her first confrontation with the Alpha King, her victory over Vera, or her moment of ultimate mercy? Your feedback helps me create more stories about underdogs who discovered they were meant for greatness all along.